4 days after burying her mother, 19-year-old Eliza Whitmore was kicked out by her stepfather with only $57 and nowhere to go. Then she found a secret address hidden inside her mother's Bible. It led to an abandoned house on Blackwood Ridge. Inside was a letter written before Eliza was born. 3 different identities belonging to her mother, and 19 years of secrets no one had ever told her. Eliza thought she had come to the house because she had nowhere else to go. She was wrong. Her mother had been waiting 19 years for her to find it. Eliza Whitmore had never imagined becoming homeless at 19. Not like this. Not 4 days after burying her mother. The afternoon was cold when she found her old suitcase sitting on the front porch. One wheel was broken, the zipper barely closed. Everything she still owned had been folded inside by someone else's hands. Eliza stood there for a moment, saying nothing. Through the open doorway, she could see the kitchen. Her mother's coffee mug was still on the windowsill. White porcelain, a little blue flower near the handle. It had been sitting there since the morning of her mother's last hospital visit. Eliza had washed every plate in that kitchen, every spoon, every glass, but she could never bring herself to wash that mug. "You need to go, Eliza." Ryan stood in the doorway. Her stepfather, the man who had lived under the same roof with her for 11 years. Eliza looked at him. She waited for an explanation, an apology, maybe even a little shame. Ryan looked down at the suitcase. His hand tightened around the doorframe. And for half a second, Eliza thought he might change his mind. He didn't. She had spent the last 8 months caring for her mother. She'd dropped out of community college, lost her part-time job, and slept most nights in a vinyl chair beside a hospital bed, waking whenever her mother coughed. Now, her mother was gone, and apparently, so was her home. Eliza picked up the suitcase. She had $57 in her wallet. No job, no place to sleep, and no one left to call. She stepped off the porch. "Eliza." Ryan's voice stopped her. She turned. For the first time that afternoon, he looked directly at her. There was something in his face she couldn't understand. Not anger, fear. "Whatever happens," he said quietly, "don't go to Blackwood Ridge." Eliza stared at him. "What?" But Ryan stepped inside and closed the door. That night, Eliza sat alone on a wooden bench at a bus station. At 11:30, she bought a cup of coffee she didn't want because the woman behind the counter had started watching her. It cost $2.19. Eliza counted the money left in her wallet twice. Then she wrapped both hands around the paper cup and pretended she was waiting for someone. She wasn't. Near midnight, cold and unable to sleep, Eliza opened the old Bible her mother had kept beside her hospital bed. The pages still smelled faintly of lavender hand cream. Her mother's hand cream. Eliza closed her eyes. Just for a second. Then something slipped from beneath the worn leather cover and fell into her lap. A folded piece of paper. Eliza knew the handwriting before she even opened it. Her breath caught. There was an address, Blackwood Ridge, Tennessee, and beneath it, 3 words. "When you're alone." Eliza read them once, then again, and a third time. All evening, she tried not to cry. Not when Ryan closed the door. Not when she counted her last few dollars. Not when strangers walked past her as if she weren't there. But sitting beneath the cold fluorescent lights of that bus station, holding the last secret her mother had left behind, Eliza finally lowered her head and cried like a child who had spent too long pretending she wasn't alone. By 6 the next morning, Eliza had made up her mind. Or, at least, that was what she told herself. The truth was, she didn't have many choices left. She sat near the bus station window with her mother's Bible on her lap and the folded note between her fingers. Blackwood Ridge, Tennessee. She searched the address 3 times on her phone. The first 2 times, she closed the map. The 3rd time, she bought a bus ticket. $28. Almost half of everything she had left. Her thumb hovered over the cancel button. Then she remembered Ryan's face. Not anger. Fear. And her mother's words. When you're alone. So Eliza boarded the bus. The ride took nearly 4 hours. Cities faded into small towns, wooded hills, old churches, and narrow roads disappearing between pine trees. Eliza held her mother's Bible against her chest. She kept thinking about the last night at the hospital. Her mother had opened her eyes sometime after midnight. "I'm sorry," she'd whispered. "For what?" "Mama." Her mother tried to smile, but no answer came. Eliza had assumed she was apologizing for dying. Now, she wasn't so sure. The bus dropped her at a roadside station shortly after 10. Blackwood Ridge was still 11 miles away. No taxis, no rideshare drivers. So Eliza walked. The broken wheel on her suitcase gave out before the 2nd mile. She carried it until her fingers went numb and her shoulder burned. Twice she thought about turning back, but there was nowhere to go back to. A faded blue pickup eventually slowed beside her. An older man leaned toward the passenger window. "You headed up the ridge." Eliza nodded. When she gave him the address, something changed in his expression. "You family?" "I don't know." The man stared at her for a moment before opening the passenger door. He drove her as far as Miller's Creek. Before Eliza climbed out, he said quietly, "That house has been empty a long time." Eliza waited. "Now just be careful." Then he drove away. The gravel road narrowed between towering pine trees. And finally, Eliza saw the house. 2 stories. Dark wooden siding faded gray. A sagging porch. Crooked shutters. Vines climbing the chimney. It didn't look haunted. That would have been easier. It looked forgotten. Eliza tried the front door. Locked. For the first time that day, anger rose inside her. She had spent almost half her money, walked for miles, followed a secret note from a dead woman, and now she couldn't even get inside. Eliza sat on the porch steps. "I came, Mama." Her voice sounded small. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do now." Then she noticed an old flower pot beside the door. Dead lavender leaned over its cracked edge. Lavender, her mother's favorite. Eliza slowly lifted the pot. A key rested underneath. The front door opened on the first try. Inside, the house smelled of dust, old wood, and lavender. White sheets covered the furniture. A grandfather clock stood silent beside the staircase. Old photographs lined a narrow table. Eliza spent the afternoon searching the house. No electricity, but the hand pump still worked, and dry firewood had been stacked beside the hearth. Someone had prepared this house to survive being forgotten. By sunset, Eliza had a fire burning. She sat on the floor beneath an old quilt and ate crackers with half a bruised apple. "I miss you," she whispered. The words came before she could stop them. "I don't know why you sent me here." The fire cracked. "You could have just told me." That was when the grandfather clock began to tick. Eliza froze. Tick, tick, tick. The clock had been silent all afternoon. Then came footsteps upstairs. 3 slow steps. 1, 2, 3. Silence. Eliza grabbed the fireplace poker. "Who's there?" No answer. Then again. 1, 2, 3. Against every instinct telling her not to. Eliza climbed the stairs. A long hallway waited above. 5 doors, 4 closed. The last stood slightly open. Eliza knew she hadn't opened it. The room beyond was cold. Floral wallpaper, a wooden vanity, a narrow bed covered with a faded rose quilt, and in the center of that bed, an envelope. Eliza stopped breathing. Her name was written across the front. Eliza. She recognized the handwriting immediately. Her mother's. Hands shaking, she opened it. At the top of the letter was a date, March 14th, 2007. 3 days before Eliza was born. My darling Eliza, if you are reading this, then I failed to keep the past from finding you. Eliza stared at the words. The letter continued. There are things I should have told you, names I buried, places I promised never to return to. I believe silence would keep you safe, but if you are truly alone now, you deserve the truth. Go to the sewing room. Find the rose. And whatever you discover, remember this. You were wanted. You were loved. And none of this began with you. Eliza couldn't read any further. Tears blurred the page. You were wanted. All her life. She'd carried the quiet fear that she needed too much. Cost too much. Took up too much space. Ryan, closing the door, had seemed to prove it. But 19 years ago, her mother had somehow known Eliza might need these words. She pressed the letter against her chest and cried. Not loudly. She cried the way people do when grief has lived inside them so long it no longer needs permission. Then Eliza looked across the hallway. A closed door stood there. A small brass rose had been nailed into the wood. Find the rose. Eliza Chloe stood. She crossed the hallway and wrapped her fingers around the doorknob. It turned, and as the door opened, Eliza still believed the worst thing that had ever happened to her was losing her mother. She had no idea what her mother had spent 19 years trying to hide. The sewing room smelled like cedar and dust. Eliza stood in the doorway, one hand still wrapped around her mother's letter. For a moment, she didn't move. Moonlight slipped through a narrow window and fell across an old sewing machine. Shelves covered the walls, filled with fabric, wooden spools, and glass jars of buttons. Nothing looked dangerous. Nothing looked important. Eliza almost laughed. This is it. Her voice disappeared into the room. Then she saw the rose, carved into the side of a tall wardrobe in the far corner, the same shape as the brass rose on the door. Eliza walked toward it. The wardrobe was empty except for 3 wire hangers and a yellow dress sealed inside a plastic garment bag. She pressed her hand against the carved rose. Nothing. She pushed harder. Click. The back panel moved. Eliza stepped away. Behind it was a narrow compartment, and inside sat a wooden box. Dark oak. Small enough to carry. A rose had been burned into the lid. Eliza lifted it carefully and placed it on the sewing table. There was no lock. She opened it. No money. No jewelry. Just papers. Dozens of them. Birth certificates. Old driver's licenses. Train tickets. Letters tied together with faded ribbon. Eliza picked up the first driver's license. The photograph was her mother. Younger. Maybe 25. But the name wasn't hers. Claire Morgan. Eliza frowned. She picked up another. Same face. Different hairstyle. Rebecca Hale. Then another. Anna Mercer. Eliza sat down. No. She placed the licenses side by side. 3 women. One face. Her mother's face. Eliza began opening the letters. Most were addressed to women she'd never heard of. Some contained only a few lines. We arrived safely. The children are sleeping again. Tell Claire we made it. Another read. I don't know how to thank her. She gave me a name when mine became dangerous. Eliza read that sentence twice. A name when mine became dangerous. Her hands grew cold. This wasn't a collection of old family papers. These were records. Evidence of lives that had been changed. Or hidden. She searched deeper into the box. Then she found the photograph. Black and white. The edges curled with age. Her mother stood in front of the Blackwood Ridge house. Much younger. Her hair fell past her shoulders. She was smiling. Eliza couldn't remember the last time she'd seen her mother smile like that. Beside her stood an older woman Eliza didn't recognize. And between them, a little girl. 6 years old, maybe 7. Dark hair. Thin arms. A serious face. Eliza brought the photograph closer to the lamp. Something about the child bothered her. The eyes. She had seen those eyes before. Every morning. In the mirror. Eliza turned the photograph over. A date was written on the back. June 2006. 9 months before Eliza was born. Beneath it were 7 words. I saved one. I couldn't save them both. Eliza stopped breathing. She read it again. Then again. No. She stood so quickly the chair fell backward. The sound cracked through the house. Who is she? Eliza looked around the empty room as if someone might answer. Who is that girl? Silence. She grabbed the box and emptied everything onto the floor. Letters scattered. Photographs slid beneath the table. Eliza searched desperately. A name, a birth certificate, anything. Then she found a small envelope. On the front was one word, Rose. Inside was a child's hospital bracelet. The plastic had yellowed. Eliza held it near the window. The name had been scratched away, but the date remained. April 12th, 2000. Eliza did the math. The girl would have been almost 7 in the photograph. Her knees weakened. Was the girl her sister? Had her mother had another child? Why had she never said anything? Eliza thought of every birthday, every Christmas, every quiet dinner at the kitchen table. 19 years. Her mother had looked across from her and carried this secret. A floorboard creaked downstairs. Eliza froze. She listened. Nothing. Then her phone vibrated. The sound made her gasp. Unknown number. One message. Eliza stared at the screen. You should have listened to Ryan. Her stomach dropped. She looked toward the window. Only darkness. Pine trees moved in the wind. Eliza quickly turned off the lamp. The room disappeared into shadow. Her phone vibrated again. A second message. Leave the house. Eliza backed away from the window. Who's there? Her voice trembled. No answer. She called Ryan. The phone rang. Once, twice, 3 times. Voicemail. Ryan. Eliza whispered his name after the beep. Someone knows I'm here. She looked down at the photograph in her hand. And I think Mom had another daughter. Her voice broke. Please call me. She ended the call. For the next hour, Eliza sat on the sewing room floor with the fireplace poker beside her. She didn't sleep. Every sound became footsteps. Every branch against the window became a hand. But no one came. Just before dawn, pale light entered the room. Eliza looked at the papers scattered around her. She should leave. Every reasonable part of her knew that. Ryan had warned her. Her mother had hidden these things for 19 years. And someone had just told her to run. Eliza picked up the photograph again. The little girl's eyes stared back at her. Then Eliza remembered the last line in her mother's letter. None of this began with you. Maybe that was true. But Eliza was beginning to understand something. Silence had protected no one forever. It had only carried fear from one generation to the next. Her mother had spent 19 years running from this house. Ryan wanted Eliza to do the same. Eliza had been running her entire life without even knowing it. She was tired. Slowly, she gathered the papers. She placed every letter back on the table, but she kept the photograph. Eliza walked downstairs. The grandfather clock had stopped ticking. She stood in front of the cold fireplace and watched morning light enter through the dusty windows. Then she took out her phone. The unknown number was still there. Eliza typed 3 words. "Who is Rose?" Her thumb hovered over the screen. Then she pressed send. The reply came less than 10 seconds later. Eliza read it once, and the blood drained from her face. Rose isn't her name. A second message appeared. You already know who she is. Eliza slowly looked down at the photograph, at the little girl's eyes, her eyes, and, for the first time, Eliza wondered if the greatest secret her mother had kept wasn't about another daughter. Maybe it was about Eliza herself. Eliza didn't leave Blackwood Ridge that morning. She should have. She knew that. Someone had her phone number. Someone knew Ryan had warned her. And somehow, they knew exactly what she had found. But fear had changed shape overnight. It was still there. Only now, something else stood beside it. A need to understand. Eliza carried every letter from the sewing room downstairs and spread them across the dining table. There were dozens, maybe hundreds. Some were so old the paper cracked along the folds. She started with the earliest date she could find. October 1963. Dear Ruth, the baby is eating again. Tell Mrs. Belle, we received the medicine. I don't know how you women found us, but my little girl is alive because you did. Eliza read it twice, then another. We left before sunrise. Helen gave us $40 in sandwiches for the children. Please tell her I will repay every cent someday. Another. No one in my family knows where I am. For the first time in 9 years, I slept without a chair pushed against the bedroom door. Eliza stopped reading. She looked toward the staircase. The house was silent. But suddenly, it didn't feel empty. She imagined young mothers sitting at this same table, children sleeping upstairs, women arriving in the dark with bruises hidden beneath long sleeves and everything they owned packed into grocery bags. Eliza touched one of the letters. They were here, she whispered. Blackwood Ridge had never been just a house. It had been a place people disappeared to when disappearing was the only way to survive. Eliza kept reading. The same names appeared again and again. Ruth, Helen, Martha, June, older women from nearby towns, a school secretary, a pharmacist's widow, a church organist. One woman owned a grocery store. Another had been a nurse. They brought canned food, baby formula, medicine, bus tickets, cash folded inside birthday cards. None of them called themselves heroes. In fact, most of them seemed terrified of being noticed. One note, written by a woman named Martha, said, "We don't need our names remembered. We just need the girls to live long enough to remember theirs." Eliza lowered the letter. Something tightened in her chest. All her life, she'd thought strength was supposed to be loud. Strong people stood in front of crowds. They received awards. Their photographs appeared in newspapers. But these women, most of them were probably gone now. Their names had almost disappeared. And still, somewhere in the world, there were children who had grown old because Ruth bought a train ticket, because Helen brought medicine, because Martha opened a door. Eliza looked around the dining room. For the first time, she understood why the house felt as though it had been waiting. Maybe it wasn't waiting for her. Maybe it had simply spent too many years with no one left to remember. She returned to the box. Her mother's name still bothered her. Claire Morgan, Rebecca Hale, Anna Mercer. 3 driver's licenses, 3 lives, 1 woman. Eliza searched every letter for those names. By late afternoon, she found Claire. A letter dated August 2005. Claire arrived with the child after midnight. She refuses to tell us where they came from. The girl hasn't spoken in 11 days. Eliza's hands began to shake. The child, she grabbed the photograph. The little girl with her eyes. Another letter. January 2006. Claire says they found her again. We moved the child before sunrise. Claire stayed behind. Eliza read faster. March 2006. She needs another name. Then finally, Rebecca. Her mother hadn't changed identities because she was hiding some shameful past. She had been running. Again, and again, and again. Eliza leaned back in the chair. She remembered being 10 years old and asking why they never visited relatives at Christmas. Her mother had smiled and said, "Some families are just small, sweetheart." Eliza had believed her. She remembered asking why there were almost no baby photographs. Lost in a move. Why they changed apartments so often when she was little. Rent keeps going up. Why her mother always checked the rearview mirror twice. Old habit. Eliza covered her mouth. She had mistaken fear for distance, silence for coldness, secrets for a lack of trust. How many times had she thought her mother didn't really know her? How many times had she closed her bedroom door because she believed her mother simply didn't understand? And all those years, maybe her mother had been listening for footsteps outside. Eliza cried then, quietly, not because the pain was new, because the memory was. Grief had a cruel way of changing old moments after the person was gone. You remembered a sentence differently. A look, a hand held too tightly. And suddenly, you understood the love hidden inside something you once resented. "I'm sorry, Mama." Eliza wiped her face. "I didn't know." Of course, no one answered. But this time, the silence didn't feel like abandonment. Eliza found an old notebook in the kitchen. She sat at the dining table and began writing down names. Ruth, Helen, Martha, June, Claire, Rebecca, Anna. Every woman, every child, every town, every date. If a letter mentioned someone only once, Eliza wrote the name down anyway. By midnight, 6 pages were filled. Her hand ached. She kept going. Because for the first time since her mother died, Eliza wasn't thinking about where she would sleep next week. She wasn't counting the money left in her wallet. She wasn't wondering whether Ryan had ever loved her. She had something she hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. But 2 questions remained. Why had her mother needed 3 names? And why was Ryan so terrified of this house? Eliza looked at her phone. No new messages. That frightened her more than another warning might have. Someone was waiting, watching, maybe hoping she'd become scared enough to leave. Eliza closed the notebook. She placed the photograph of the little girl beside it. Then she looked toward the dark window. "I know you're out there," she whispered. Her voice shook, but she didn't look away. "I don't know who you are." She placed one hand over the names she'd written. "But I'm going to find out." Because Eliza Whitmore had arrived at Blackwood Ridge believing she had nowhere left to belong. Now, surrounded by the names of women history had nearly forgotten, she felt something strange, something warm. She wasn't sure whether these women were part of her family, but somehow, their unfinished story had become hers. And before whoever was watching came for the truth, Eliza intended to find it first. The bell rang a little after midnight. Eliza was asleep on the couch when the sound pulled her awake. One sharp ring. Then silence. She sat up. Rain struck the windows hard enough to sound like handfuls of gravel. For 3 nights, Eliza had barely slept. Every creak made her reach for her phone. Every pair of headlights on the distant road made her wonder if whoever had sent those messages had finally come. Then the bell rang again. Eliza froze. The old iron bell hung beside the front gate, nearly 100 feet from the house. Someone was out there? She reached for the fireplace poker. "Eliza, don't be stupid," she whispered. But then she heard something beneath the rain. A voice. "Hello. Young. Female. Please. Is anyone there?" Eliza moved toward the window. At first, she saw only rain. Then lightning flashed. A girl stood at the gate. She wore a gray sweatshirt soaked dark with water. One hand held a black trash bag. The other rested over her stomach. Eliza's heart stopped. She opened the front door. "Who are you?" The girl looked toward the porch. "My name's Emily. How did you find this place?" Emily hesitated. "A woman at the bus station told me." "What woman?" "I don't know." Eliza tightened her grip on the poker. Emily noticed it. "I can leave." She turned. Wait. Eliza didn't know why she said it. Maybe it was the trash bag. Maybe it was the way Emily kept one arm around herself. Or maybe Eliza simply recognized the look on her face. The look of someone trying very hard not to ask for too much. "How old are you?" 18. Eliza looked at her stomach. Emily lowered her eyes. 6 months? Does your family know where you are? A bitter little smile crossed Emily's face. My dad knows I'm not at his house anymore. The words were simple, but Eliza understood them. What happened? Emily looked toward the road. He found out I was pregnant. The rain filled the silence. He put my clothes in this bag and told me I had until dark. Eliza looked at the black trash bag. 4 days earlier, her own life had been waiting on a porch inside a broken suitcase. Different container. Same message. You don't belong here anymore. I just need one night, Emily said. I'll leave in the morning. I promise. Eliza should have said no. Someone was watching the house. She had received warnings. She didn't know Emily. She barely knew herself anymore. But then she remembered a line from one of the letters. We don't need our names remembered. We just need the girls to live long enough to remember theirs. Eliza lowered the fireplace poker. Come inside. Emily stared at her. Really? You're freezing. That was all Eliza said. But when Emily crossed the threshold, something inside the house seemed to change. Eliza gave her dry clothes she'd found upstairs. She heated canned tomato soup and placed 2 bowls on the kitchen table. Emily ate slowly at first. Then faster. Eliza pretended not to notice. When did you eat last? She asked. Emily stopped. Yesterday. Eliza pushed the crackers toward her. Finish those. Emily's eyes filled with tears. I'm sorry. For what? The food. Eliza stared at her. Emily wiped her face quickly. My dad always said I was expensive. Something inside Eliza cracked. Not loudly. Just enough. My mom used to tell me I worried too much about taking up space, Eliza said. Emily looked at her. I think maybe people tell girls things long enough, and eventually we start saying them to ourselves. Neither of them spoke for a while. The rain softened. Upstairs, Eliza prepared the smallest bedroom. Emily stood in the doorway. I really will leave tomorrow. Eliza pulled the quilt over the bed. We'll talk tomorrow. Emily nodded. Then, as Eliza turned to leave, the girl whispered, Thank you. Eliza stopped. She thought of Ruth, Helen, Martha, June, women who had opened this door long before she was born. "You're welcome," she said. That night, Eliza slept for almost 5 hours. It was the longest she'd slept since her mother's funeral. In the morning, the rain had stopped. Mist covered the ridge. Emily was still asleep upstairs when Eliza walked outside. She wanted air, nothing more. Then she saw the envelope. It lay beneath the iron gate. White, clean, dry. Eliza stopped walking. The ground around it was soaked. Someone had placed it there after the rain ended. Her heartbeat quickened. She looked toward the trees. Nothing moved. Eliza picked up the envelope. Inside was a photograph. Her photograph. She was standing in the sewing room. The wooden box open in front of her. The picture had been taken through the window. From outside the house, Eliza's hands began to shake. She turned it over. A sentence was written in black ink. "Your mother opened that door once. Look what it cost her." Eliza couldn't breathe. She looked toward the sewing room window. Someone had stood there, close enough to watch her read her mother's letters, close enough to photograph her. Her first instinct was to run. Pack the suitcase. Wake Emily. Leave before whoever was watching decided photographs weren't enough. Eliza took one step toward the house. Then she stopped. Through the upstairs window, she could see a light. Emily had turned on the battery lantern beside her bed. A shadow moved behind the curtain. A pregnant 18-year-old girl. Thrown out by her father. Carrying her life in a trash bag. Eliza looked down at the photograph again. Her mother opened that door once. Look what it cost her. Maybe her mother had been afraid. Maybe Ruth had been afraid. Helen. Martha. June. Maybe courage had never meant they weren't scared. Maybe courage was simply what they did while their hands were still shaking. Eliza walked back to the house. She locked the front door, then the back. She checked every window, closed every curtain. Finally, she stood in the hallway with the photograph pressed against her palm. Upstairs, a floorboard creaked. Emily was awake. For the first time in Eliza's life, someone else in that house had fewer choices than she did. And suddenly, running felt different. Eliza had spent 19 years believing survival meant finding somewhere safe to hide. But perhaps her mother had tried to teach her something else. Sometimes, when a frightened person knocks on your door, you become the safe place. Eliza placed the photograph inside her mother's Bible. Then she picked up the fireplace poker and sat beside the front window. She was terrified. She wouldn't pretend otherwise. But she stayed. Because if danger was coming to Blackwood Ridge, Eliza Whitmore had made her choice. She would not let another girl face it alone. 3 days passed. Emily didn't leave, and neither did Eliza. They never really discussed it. Each morning, Emily would come downstairs and find something to do. She washed dishes, folded old blankets, swept years of dust from the upstairs rooms. Eliza kept reading letters. At night, they ate together at the kitchen table. 2 girls who had been told to leave. 2 girls pretending they weren't listening for cars on the road. Then, on the 3rd afternoon, one finally came. Eliza heard the engine before she saw it. An old beige Buick climbed slowly toward the house. "Upstairs," Eliza said. Emily looked at her. "What?" "Go upstairs. Lock the bedroom door." "Eliza." "Please." Something in Eliza's voice made Emily obey. Eliza stepped onto the porch. The Buick stopped near the gate. For a long moment, no one got out. Then the driver's door opened. An elderly woman stepped onto the gravel. She was small, silver hair pinned loosely behind her head. a brown cardigan buttoned over a pale blue blouse. She looked less like someone who had come to threaten Eliza, and more like someone's grandmother arriving late for church. But Eliza had learned not to trust appearances. "Who are you?" The woman stopped. Her eyes lifted to Eliza's face, and then she began to cry, not quietly. Her hand flew to her mouth. "Oh, dear God." Eliza tightened her grip on the fireplace poker hidden beside her leg. "Who are you?" The woman took one careful step forward. "Eleanor Hayes." The name hit Eliza immediately. She had written it in the notebook. Eleanor. A nurse. Her name appeared in 6 letters between 1998 and 2007. "You knew my mother?" Eleanor closed her eyes. "Yes." Eliza's heart pounded. "Then come inside." They sat across from each other at the dining table. Eliza placed the photograph between them. Her mother. The older woman. The little girl. Eleanor stared at it. All the colors seemed to leave her face. "Where did you find this?" "How you know her?" Eleanor didn't answer. "The girl," Eliza said. "Who is she?" Eleanor folded her hands. They were trembling. "Your mother came to Blackwood Ridge when she was 24. Eliza waited. She wasn't running for herself. Eleanor looked toward the staircase. She was helping girls leave families that would have rather buried a secret than admit something was wrong inside their own homes. Eliza thought of Emily sleeping upstairs. She brought them here. Sometimes. Eleanor nodded. Sometimes we found another place, a church family. A widow with an extra bedroom. A cousin 3 states away who knew better than to ask questions. Eleanor smiled sadly. Old women, mostly. Eliza said nothing. "People don't notice old women," Eleanor continued. "That was our advantage." A nurse carrying a medicine bag. A widow buying 2 extra bags of groceries. A grandmother purchasing a bus ticket. She looked around the room. We were invisible. Eliza thought of the names in her notebook. Ruth. Helen. Martha. June. They saved people. Yes. Why did no one know? Because knowing would have put the girls in danger. Eleanor touched the edge of the photograph. And then, 19 years ago, something went wrong. The room seemed colder. What happened? Eleanor looked at Eliza. A child disappeared. Eliza's stomach tightened. The girl in the picture? Eleanor didn't answer immediately. That was answer enough. We searched for her, Eleanor whispered. For weeks. Your mother nearly lost her mind. Who took her? We never knew. You're lying. Eleanor flinched. Eliza stood. Everyone keeps doing this. Her voice rose. My mother lied. Ryan lied. Now you're sitting in her house telling me half a story. Eliza. No. Tears filled her eyes. I buried my mother without knowing who she was. The words came faster now. I spent 19 years thinking she didn't trust me. And now I find out she had 3 names, and some child disappeared and someone is taking pictures of me through windows. Eleanor stared at her. Eliza's voice broke. I deserve the whole truth. For a moment, neither woman moved. Then Eleanor nodded. Yes. 1 word. Soft. Ashamed. You do. Eliza sat down. Eleanor took a slow breath. After the child disappeared, your mother received photographs. Eliza froze. What photographs? Pictures of the house. Pictures of women who had stayed here. Eleanor swallowed. And pictures of your mother. Eliza thought of the envelope beneath the gate. She believed someone was watching Blackwood Ridge. Who? We never found out. So she ran. Yes. Eleanor looked at her. But she didn't run alone. Eliza stopped breathing. Ryan helped her. The name landed harder than anything else Eleanor had said. No. He gave her money, found an apartment, helped her get documents under a new name. No. Eliza. He threw me out. I know. He closed the door in my face 4 days after I buried her. Eleanor's eyes softened. I didn't say Ryan was a good man. Eliza looked away. I said he helped your mother survive. Those words hurt in a different way. Eliza had spent days building Ryan into something simple. Cruel. Cold. Easy to hate. But people were rarely simple. That was becoming the hardest truth of all. Eleanor leaned forward. Ryan never feared this house, Eliza. Eliza slowly looked at her. He feared what your mother believed was still watching it. Silence filled the room. Upstairs, a floorboard creaked. Eleanor looked toward the sound. You're not alone here. Eliza hesitated. No. Who is she? Her name is Emily. Eleanor studied Eliza's face. Then something like sadness and pride crossed hers. You opened the door. Eliza looked down. She had nowhere else to go. Eleanor reached across the table and covered Eliza's hand with hers. That is exactly what your mother said the first time. Eliza couldn't speak. For 19 years, she'd wondered what part of her came from her mother. Her eyes, her stubbornness, the way she cried when she was angry. Maybe inheritance wasn't always something hidden in blood. Maybe sometimes it was a choice you made without knowing someone before you had made the same one. That evening, Eleanor stayed for dinner. Emily came downstairs. For the first time in days, the house held 3 voices. Eleanor told stories about Eliza's mother. Small ones. How she hated instant coffee. How she sang the wrong words to old country songs. How she once drove 30 miles with a flat tire because she was too stubborn to stop. Eliza laughed. Really laughed. And then cried because she had. Later, after Emily and Eleanor had gone upstairs, Eliza stood alone near the fireplace. For the first time since arriving at Blackwood Ridge, her mother felt less like a mystery, and more like her mother again. Then headlights swept across the front windows. Eliza stopped breathing. A car door slammed outside. She moved toward the curtain. One man stood beside the gate. Even in the darkness, Eliza recognized him. Ryan. And this time, he hadn't come to close the door. He had come to Blackwood Ridge. Eliza met Ryan on the porch. She didn't invite him inside. For 11 years, that man had been part of her home. Tonight, she couldn't bring herself to offer him a chair. What are you doing here? Ryan looked older than he had a week ago. His coat was wet, his face was pale. I got your voicemail. That was 3 days ago. I know. Eliza folded her arms. You threw me out. Ryan said nothing. You knew about this house. Silence. You knew about my mother. Eliza. Were you watching me? Ryan looked up. What? The messages, the photograph outside the gate. No. You expect me to believe you. No, Ryan said quietly. I don't expect you to believe anything I say. That answer stopped her. Ryan turned toward his car. Eliza stepped back. He opened the trunk and removed a cardboard box. Nothing more. He carried it to the porch and set it between them. What is that? The reason I told you not to come here. Eliza stared at him. Then she opened the box. The first photograph showed a little girl on a playground. Red coat, dark hair, maybe 3 years old. Eliza recognized the coat. Her mother had kept it in a closet for years. She picked up another photograph. 7 years old. Eliza riding her bicycle. Another 12. Standing outside her middle school. 15. At a grocery store with her mother. 18. Walking across a community college parking lot. Eliza stopped. There were 19 photographs, one for every year of her life, all taken from a distance. Her hands went cold. Where did you get these? Your mother. Eliza looked at him. They came once a year, Ryan said. Sometimes on your birthday, sometimes a week before. Who sent them? We never knew. You expect me to believe that? I spent 19 years trying to find out. Ryan reached into his coat. Eliza stiffened. He removed one final envelope. This came 2 days after your mother's funeral. Inside was a photograph of Eliza, standing beside her mother's grave. On the back were 5 words. Now she has no one. Eliza sat down on the porch step. For a moment, she couldn't feel her hands. Ryan remained standing. Your mother made me promise I'd keep you away from Blackwood Ridge. So you threw me into the street. His face tightened. I panicked. You panicked. I saw the photograph. Then you mentioned Blackwood Ridge. I never mentioned it. Ryan froze. Eliza stared at him. I found the address after you threw me out. Silence. Something changed in Ryan's face. Fear. The same fear she'd seen in the doorway. Then they knew before I did, he whispered. Eliza stood. You still haven't answered me. Ryan looked at her. Why did you throw me out? His eyes filled. It was the first time Eliza had ever seen Ryan cry. I thought if you hated me enough to leave, you'd stay alive. Eliza stared at him. The words didn't heal anything. They didn't erase the bus station, the unwanted coffee, the $57. They didn't erase the feeling of seeing her suitcase on the porch 4 days after burying her mother. You could have told me. I promised her. She was dead. Ryan. His face broke. I know. No, you don't get to say that like it excuses you. I know. You hurt me. I know. Eliza waited for him to defend himself. He didn't, and somehow that made her angrier. Eleanor appeared in the doorway behind them. She had heard enough. Ryan. He looked at her. Eleanor's face went pale when she saw the photographs. Then she picked up the one of Eliza at 7. She turned it over. Her eyes narrowed. What? Eliza moved closer. Eleanor touched the lower corner. A tiny rose had been drawn in black ink. I've seen this before. She hurried inside. Minutes later, Eleanor returned with one of the old letters. The same rose appeared beneath the signature. A single name. Madeline. Eliza searched her notebook. There it was. Madeline Cross. The child who disappeared in 2007. The girl in the photograph. She survived, Eliza whispered. Eleanor nodded slowly. She would have been 26 when the first photograph arrived. The truth took another 2 weeks to uncover. Madeline had not been taken by a stranger. She had run, moved between relatives, foster homes, temporary apartments. For years, she believed Eliza's mother had chosen another child over her. Eliza. I saved one. I couldn't save them both. Madeline had spent most of her life believing she was the one who hadn't been worth saving. When Eliza finally met her, it wasn't dramatic. No police lights. No screaming. Madeline sat across from her in a small diner outside Knoxville. 32 years old. Dark hair. Thin hands wrapped around a cup of coffee. And the same eyes Eliza had seen in the photograph. Why did you watch me? Eliza asked. Madeline looked down. Because she loved you. Eliza said nothing. I wanted to know what was so special about you. Her voice cracked. What did you find? Madeline laughed once. A broken little sound. A girl who lost her mother. Eliza's eyes filled. Madeline began to cry. I thought she saved you instead of me. Eliza reached into her bag. She placed her mother's letter on the table. Then the old photograph. I don't think she stopped trying to save you. Madeline stared at the words on the back. I saved one. I couldn't save them both. For decades, Madeline had read those words as a choice. Eliza now understood them as a confession of failure. A mother's grief. A wound that had never closed. The truth didn't make everything beautiful. Ryan wasn't instantly forgiven. Madeline wasn't suddenly healed. Eliza didn't forget 19 years of secrets. But maybe healing had never meant pretending the wound wasn't there. Maybe it meant finally looking at it together. Months later, Eliza stood on the porch at Blackwood Ridge. Emily sat in the garden, one hand resting on her growing belly. Eleanor was inside arguing with Ryan about how badly he'd repaired a kitchen cabinet. And Eliza smiled. Not because everything was fixed. It wasn't. But the secrets were no longer living alone. For generations, fear had taught everyone connected to Blackwood Ridge the same lesson. Run. Hide. Change your name. Say nothing. Eliza chose something different. She opened the door. Because sometimes, the bravest thing a person can do isn't forgive. It isn't forget. It's simply to stop passing the silence onto the next generation. And for the first time in 19 years, Blackwood Ridge had nothing left to hide. 1 year later, the house on Blackwood Ridge was still standing. But it no longer looked forgotten. The porch had been repaired. The crooked shutters were painted white. Warm light glowed behind the windows at night. And along the old iron fence, roses climbed toward the sun. Red, white, soft pink. Eliza had planted the first one herself. She was 20 now, a year older, though some days it felt like she'd lived 10 years since the night she slept alone at that bus station with $57 in her wallet. Eliza didn't run some enormous shelter. There were no television cameras, no reporters waiting outside. No photograph of her hanging on the wall. Rosehaven House was smaller than people imagined. 6 bedrooms. 1 shared kitchen. A garden Eleanor insisted everyone help with. And a front door that was never opened without care. Eliza worked alongside local social workers. Eleanor handled medical appointments and complained loudly whenever anyone called her retired. Several older women from nearby towns volunteered. Some remembered Blackwood Ridge. Others had mothers who remembered. They brought casseroles, baby clothes, bus passes. Sometimes money folded quietly inside envelopes. History, Eliza realized, didn't always repeat itself in terrible ways. Sometimes, kindness repeated, too. Emily had been the first. Her baby girl was born on a rainy Tuesday morning in May. She named her Hope. When Eliza heard the name, she cried so hard Eleanor had to hand her a dish towel because no one could find the tissues. Emily eventually moved into a small apartment outside Knoxville. She found work at a dental office. But every Sunday afternoon, she returned to Rosehaven, usually carrying groceries, always carrying hope. You know you don't have to keep coming back, Eliza told her once. Emily smiled. I know. That was why she came. Near the front door of Rosehaven stood a narrow wooden table. The same table that had once held photographs covered in dust. Inside its top drawer, Eliza kept her mother's letter. The paper had softened along the folds. Eliza no longer read it every day. She didn't need to. She knew the words by heart. You were wanted. You were loved. And none of this began with you. But whenever someone new arrived, Eliza found herself thinking about that letter. Sometimes it was a 17-year-old girl carrying a backpack. Sometimes a young mother with a baby sleeping against her shoulder. Once, a girl arrived with everything she owned inside 2 black trash bags. Eliza had to turn away for a moment, because suddenly she was 19 again, standing on a porch, looking at a broken suitcase, $57 in her wallet, waiting for someone to tell her she still belonged somewhere. The girl at the door apologized 3 times before stepping inside. "I'm sorry it's so late. I'm sorry I didn't call. I'm sorry. I didn't know where else to go." Eliza looked at her, really looked at her, and she understood something her mother had probably understood long before her. People who have been made to feel unwanted often apologize for needing help, even when they're drowning. Especially then. Eliza didn't say, "I can save you." She had learned better than that. No one person could save another person's entire life. Eleanor had taught her that. Her mother had lived it. Even Ryan, in his own broken way, had proved it. Love without honesty could become fear. Protection without trust could become another kind of wound. So Eliza simply opened the door wider. "You can rest here tonight," she said. The girl began to cry. Eliza smiled gently. "Tomorrow, we'll figure out the next step together." That was Rose Haven. Not a miracle. Not a promise that everything would be easy. Just tonight, then tomorrow, then the next step. Ryan still came to the house sometimes. Eliza had not forgotten what he did. Forgiveness, she discovered, wasn't a door you walked through once. Some days, she could sit beside him on the porch and drink coffee. Other days, she remembered the bus station and couldn't look at him. Ryan never asked her to hurry. Maybe that was part of his apology. Madeline came twice that year. The first visit lasted 20 minutes. The second lasted 3 hours. She never stayed overnight, but before leaving the second time, she planted a rose beside the fence. No one asked her what it meant. Some things deserved time before they needed words. And Eleanor stayed. At 73, she still climbed the stairs faster than Eliza and insisted everyone else was simply slow. On quiet evenings, the 2 of them sat on the porch. Sometimes Eleanor told stories about Eliza's mother. Sometimes they said nothing. Eliza had once believed silence meant distance. Now she knew better. There was a silence that hid secrets, and there was a silence shared between people who no longer needed to hide. They were not the same. One autumn evening, Eliza stood alone at the front gate. The roses moved gently in the wind. Behind her, someone laughed in the kitchen. A baby cried upstairs. Eleanor complained about a burned pie. The house was alive. Eliza looked toward the road she'd walked a year earlier carrying her broken suitcase. She thought about her mother, about all the things she'd never been able to ask. There would always be questions. Grief was like that. You didn't finish it. You simply learned how to carry love after the person was gone. Eliza touched the old letter in her coat pocket. "I understand now, Mama," she whispered. The wind moved through the trees, and Eliza smiled. Because her mother had spent a lifetime trying to build walls strong enough to keep pain away, Eliza had chosen something different. She built a door, and she left it open. Maybe you can't rewrite what happened to you. You can't return to the night someone told you to leave and make them choose kinder words. You can't recover every year lost to fear. You can't always get the apology you deserved. But you can decide what happens next. You can decide whether the pain ends with you, or whether it becomes the reason you recognize pain in someone else's eyes. The reason you pull out a chair, the reason you listen, the reason when someone stands trembling outside in the rain, you open the door. If Eliza's story touched something in your heart, Subscribe for more stories about ordinary people finding strength in the moments they thought would break them. And if you know someone who feels lost right now, share this story with them. They may not need someone to save them. Maybe. They just need to know there's still an open door somewhere.